All right, guys, guess who's back? Former President Joe Biden back in the spotlight, making news. He appeared on The View, his first American television interview since he left office back in January. He told the host that he could have won the election if he would have stayed in it and faced off against Donald Trump. Watch.
Knowing what you know now, do you think you would have beat him?
Yeah, he still got 7 million fewer votes.
Yes.
Okay. A lot of people didn't show up. Number one. Number two, they're very close in those toss-up states.
All right, as you can imagine, that claim did not sit well with some Democrats, especially former Obama aide and Pod Save America co-host Dan Pfeffer. He blasted President Biden for his comments. Take a listen.
I find it very aggravating and frankly infuriating when he says that he thinks he would have won.
Yeah, I know.
Because I feel like it's politically insane, right? It's like detached from reality. But even if you truly believe that, to verbalize that in such a direct way repeatedly is, to me, so disrespectful of Kamala Harris, who he put in an impossible position in a gazillion ways.
All right, so that was Dan Pfeffer speaking there about his feelings, saying that he basically undermined the Vice President, Kamala Harris. So much to unpack here, guys. I'll start with you, Antonio. First of all, what did you make of the fact that he decided to come out, and more importantly, the message that he delivered that he thinks he still would have been somehow able to be done?
Well, first, a few questions. Who is this for?
Right.
These statements,
yeah, very
these
important
repeated
question.
remarks. It doesn't certainly seem like it's for voters. It doesn't seem like it sets up the next generation of the Democratic Party for success. He's not speaking to what a lot of people have been asking for, which is some clear story of opposition, who we are, what are we delivering in opposition to Trump in this current moment. None of that really was present there.
It's not forward
kind
looking.
of seemed all about me and my legacy to a lot of people, including voters, the fellow reporters, politicians I've spoken to in recent days. But the thing I was brought back to, my friend Ested Herndon at the New York Times, he followed Kamala for a while on the campaign trail. He wrote this big magazine article piece about her that at times caused a lot of controversy. But the reporting there was really incredible. And one of the things that he's talked about consistently is how, even while his presidency was ongoing, his wing of the White House was actually trying to undermine Harris at many turns. And this, to me, feels like another piece of that story. You know, why would you do this to her after what? And you know that she's contemplating either a gubernatorial run or potentially coming back into the presidential race. So I just come back to the question, what is this about and who was it for?
Yeah, such an important question.
I would add there's a lot of debate about why Kamala Harris was not a compelling candidate as the Democrat on the top of the Democratic ticket. But I think one of her biggest vulnerabilities is that she did not separate herself from Biden enough.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
He had very poor approval ratings, historically poor approval ratings on the economy relative to where the economy actually was in black and white. And he tied himself to her. You know, he really just, I think this was in the piece that you're referring to by Ested. He really twisted her arm and said, don't you dare have any daylight between the two of us. And that would have been to her advantage. It would have been to the advantage of Democrats. It would have been to the advantage of democracy, frankly.
I'm going to go out and answer the question that Joe Biden posed, which is, you know, he said a lot of people sat this election out. And that is true. We can see that in the numbers that they did not have the same amount of turnout. But the reason why people did not turn up for this election on the Democratic side, I would argue, was for two reasons. Joe Biden promised to be a transitional president and pave a way for a new generation of leadership. 2 years ago, he could have said, I did my part. I defeated Donald Trump. I saved our democracy. I recovered from COVID. I put the economy on the right track. And then I am going to allow for the next generation of leaders to have a primary and to compete. He did not do that. He stubbornly stayed in this race. The politics of it played out the way that they did. He rightfully appointed Kamala Harris as his successor, and I do believe she deserved it, but she would have been better off had she gone through a primary, whether or not they had the time for it. But the second thing, to your point, which I completely agree with, is that the Gaza war cast a large shadow on Joe Biden's legacy, and people were so desperate for Kamala Harris to differentiate herself from Joe Biden on the Gaza war. They were hoping that she would come out and say, look, he did it the way he did it. I'm going to do it in a different way. And they didn't see a daylight between them. They actually saw her a continuation of the policies that Joe Biden implemented on Gaza, not standing up to Israel, not ending up the war, not releasing the hostages. And ultimately, they're like, it's going to be 4 more years of that. And they did not want to take that risk.
I think he was an anchor weighing her down in many respects.
Yes, absolutely.
On Gaza, on the economy, on the fact that he blew his debate.
Yes.
Right. And then there were all of these questions about whether the rest of the White House, perhaps including Kamala Harris, were covering up for some diminished capacity that he was suffering. And all of that
is rocket science.
Yes.
We
it
had
all put her in
entire
a
teams
terrible
of
position.
people. I was just on one of them that traipsed around our country, knocking on doors, asking voters these exact questions.
Yeah.
Joe Biden, I don't really think he can do it. I'm not sure I want to vote for him or the person who I see as attached to him.
Yeah.
I had conversations with black voters in North Carolina who felt completely screwed over by the Democratic Party, who came from families that had been involved in Souls to the Polls activism, who were consistent Democratic voters who did not turn out this cycle because of the Gaza war in many cases, and then because they felt like this is more of the same thing, and that Biden had told them that he was going to be a transitional president. So all of these things, you don't actually have to sit here, get a big panel together and ask the experts. The voters told us how they felt, and then they showed us on Election Day.
Yeah.
So to come back on The View and say, what all of you think doesn't really seem to matter to me. This is the story I'm going to tell anyway. At a time when Democrats have these sagging poll numbers and they're trying to rebuild relationships in communities and bring people back into the big tent. I don't know.
And I'll say one last thing before we go. I know we got to run. No disrespect whatsoever to The View, but if Joe Biden wants to have a conversation about his legacy and his policies, he should have done a hard-hitting interview with somebody where somebody can actually hold his feet to the fire and ask him questions about the decisions he made. And there's a reason why they wanted to go on The View. And to your point, why now? What does anyone gain from this in rehashing this?
Well, to the extent that they did talk about his declining capacity, whatever, his mental issues, because of the debate. It was interesting in that Jill Biden kind of jumped in and rescued him from rambling on exactly a question on this.
Yeah.